A couple of years ago, I made a video about Doug Walker, where I defended him from accusations that he was an egotistical, talentless filmmaker with very articulate and well-reasoned arguments, including heavy use of a rhetorical device that I took from the apologetics of Ken Ham.
Do you even remember this? Were you around?
If you're then going to use radioactive elements and talk about the age of the Earth, you've got a problem, because you weren't there.
The jury's still out on whether Droopy the dog was, in fact, there. But since I've already made my Doug Walker Nostalgia Critic video, I think it only fitting to follow it up with a video about the other angry internet critic, James Rolfe, also known as the Angry Video Game Nerd. I'm a big fan of the old Nostalgia Critic videos, and I'm a big fan of the old Angry Video Game Nerd videos. And in fact, the Nerd was, if anything, a little bit more impressive than the Nostalgia Critic, because while the Nostalgia Critic would record all of his videos in front of that yellow beige wall, the Nerd would do a lot more creative things with his camera angles, really creating more of a home movie out of the whole experience. In fact, he kind of reminds me a bit of Alton Brown's show Good Eats, where he would eschew the typical cooking show format for something a little bit more creative and whimsical. And this is fitting because James Rolfe got his start long before YouTube, making home movies when he was a little kid. And in fact, the Angry Video Game Nerd predates YouTube by about a year, which means in about 8 months, the Angry Video Game Nerd is going to turn 20 years old. Can you believe it? He's been playing the same character for 20 years. The same character for 20 years. The same character for 20 years. You know, the Beatles, they were really good in the 60s, weren't they? Yeah. Were they good 20 years later? Were they as good 20 years later as they were in the 60s? Were they still making Beatles quality music in 1983? John was dead. Paul was making Give My Regards to Broad Street. Ringo's career was basically over in a commercial sense. And George actually was gearing up for another comeback with the Traveling Wilburys and Cloud 9, so I guess he was doing okay. But the point is, they had their 7 years of peak success and then a long grace period in the 1970s where they were still having some amount of success because they were still actually pretty good and people were still enjoying their output. But what you see is a slow, gradual decline. And this is very natural. And this happens to a lot of YouTubers. They have one moment where they have a certain spark about them that makes them appealing, that makes them important. And then they struggle for years after that to capture that same magic. And a lot of them just end up moving on to something else. But some YouTubers have bills to pay and children to feed, and they can't afford to try something new. When you've been doing it this long and it's the only thing you know how to do, why on earth would you ever think of trying something new? Especially when the last guy who tried something new, good old Nostalgia Critic, crashed and burned so hard that the name of his new attempt at a show still lives in infamy. The point I am making is that James Rolfe is a man who has cocooned himself into a career that he has long outgrown, and a way of making videos that just isn't what it used to be. And instead of recognizing that problem and looking for ways to get his spark back, he has spent the last 5 years slowly pushing his own career out of his life to make way for the things that he cares more about. It's like if Seth MacFarlane never did anything after Family Guy and just spent the next 10 years going into the studio every week to do voices and then going home to spend time with his kids. I mean, you can't really blame him, can you? You can't really blame a guy like James Rolfe for losing interest in a job where he has to scream at bad video games. And you can't really blame him for wanting to spend more time with his children either, especially when they're at such a young age. And you can't even really blame him for not wanting to work, because most of us don't like working anyway, and we value our leisure time. And so if you can find a way to still make money without having to work, it would be stupid not to take that offer up. But can you blame him for making boring, stale, phoned-in entertainment?
Yes.
And can you blame him for slowly corroding the legacy of his most important creation?
Yes.
This is the situation James Rolfe finds himself in today, and I'm not the only person who's noticed this. There's a whole subreddit called the Cinemassacre Truth, full of people who are interested in criticizing the direction that this YouTube channel is taking. But the people over at Cinemassacre Truth aren't only just interested in the quality of the YouTube videos that are coming out. They're also interested in what is going behind the scenes that might be causing this gradual decline in quality. All of the drama, all of the interpersonal squabbles and changing leadership that's going on. And so this subreddit has become a hub for all kinds of gossip and details and memes. And it's some of the funniest, most savage stuff I have ever read. And what really tickled me about all of this is that James Rolfe is really a nice guy on a personal level, despite all of the creative cussing and anger in his YouTube videos. Really, when you get down to it, he's a very, very soft-spoken and some would say lethargic person. I actually think that this hilarious picture that has been memed to no end on the subreddit is a perfect summation of what kind of person James really is. While Mike, the real angry video game nerd, is screaming at the video game he's playing, James is just totally asleep on the couch next to him, completely checked out. And even though James isn't actually asleep in this still frame, he still gives off a very narcoleptic quality, like the dormouse from Alice in Wonderland. Or you know how Donald Trump always called Joe Biden Sleepy Joe? Yeah, well, this is Sleepy Jimmy, or Bimmy, as he's called on the subreddit. In most of his videos, he talks with very little energy, as if he's falling asleep mid-conversation, especially when there's more than one person. And so the people with all of the energy and the social skills do all the talking, while he's just sitting there going, yeah. But what James isn't is mean or rude. He's a very polite person, and he loves his family. In many ways, James Rolfe is a great person, which is why I just find it so amusing that there's this subreddit devoted to clowning on him, memeing on him, and just generally bullying James Rolfe. And when I say funny, I genuinely mean it. I mean, I think that this subreddit is hilarious. I think it's savage, and I love it. There's just something so funny about bullying a guy who is just, you know, just this mild-mannered, normal person trying to take care of his family with a job that makes him a decent income. And then while everyone's criticizing him and joking about him, he's just sitting there taking a nap. But it's important to point out that the people over at Cinemassacre Truth don't actually hate James Rolfe. Most of them don't actually hate James Rolfe. They respect him for his old videos, and they miss those old videos, that kind of energy that he used to have. And so there's something cathartic then about being able to laugh at just the slow degeneration in quality and energy of something that you used to like, because that kind of enlivens the thing, the passion over that thing again, and makes you feel something about it again. Whereas if you don't joke about it or make light of it in any way, it can just get kind of depressing to watch. And so that's kind of why I think this subreddit is so popular among Cinemassacre fans. So most of the people here, like me, aren't interested in really hating on James. We're just here to laugh. We're just here for the humor of it. And so think of this video not as a criticism of James Rolfe or really a criticism of any of the people who work with James Rolfe, as much as just a celebration of all of the wonderful cynical humor that these people have provided us unwittingly at their expense. And there's a lot of meat on this bone because these are big, thick, juicy, meaty boys. There's a lot of pork in these beans. There's a lot of grease in this frying pan, if you know what I mean. This is a stick to your ribs kind of meal, so tuck in because we're in for a treat. An exquisite delight. And we have a lot of ground to cover. We'll save James for the main course at the end because I want to introduce first all of the other people behind the scenes at Cinemassacre, because there's a lot of drama, a lot of gossip, and a lot of memes here. We'll start with a salad, the bean sprout, motherfucker Mike. Motherfucker Mike is the most important person to Cinemassacre outside of James Rolfe, because it was Mike who actually created the Cinemassacre channel, which used to be called James Nintendo Nerd. And it was Mike who actually convinced James to keep making Angry Video Game Nerd videos. At first, he only wanted to make 3, but it was Mike who saw the potential in this series. Because you see, James wanted to be a filmmaker. He made home movies as a kid, and he wanted to then graduate to making real movies with actors and hired crew. And so he thought of the Angry Video Game Nerd as just a joke, you know, as just something he did for fun, as a laugh, as a lark one time. But Mike really saw the potential in this because he saw that James had a real talent for comedy. And he saw that in the Video Game Nerd, James had created a winning character and a winning formula. Something that could be repeated over and over again, that was unique, original. It was like nothing you'd seen on TV. And that of all of the short films James had produced up to that point, the nerd videos are the ones that had the most appeal. In one of the nerd videos, James made a joke about reviewing the game Raid 2020 in the year 2020.
Well, here's a little history lesson. Color Dreams was the company making all these unlicensed games for the NES, like Captain Comics, Secret Scout, and Raid 2020. Maybe I'll review that in the year 2020.
And when he made that joke, I'm pretty sure he didn't think that he was still going to be making nerd videos in 2020, but when 2020 rolled around and he was still making nerd videos, he kind of had to review it. And I think that James, being, thinking of himself more as a filmmaker, didn't really see YouTube he didn't really see it in the way Mike saw it. I think Mike fully embraced the idea of this new kind of social media entertainment, but James was more stuck in an old mindset, and so it was really Mike who had to bring that out of him. An important theme that you'll notice with James is that he really wouldn't have gotten far without his friends, and Mike is the perfect example of that. But while there are a lot of good things you can say about Mike, he also brought a lot of drama onto himself, because while James was busy making movies and taking naps, Mike was reading the comments and responding to them. And he wasn't exactly as docile as James. In fact, there's a commonly held theory that I actually think has something to it, that the nerd character was actually based on Mike, that he was an exaggerated version of Mike Matei. And this makes sense because Mike Matei was really one of the first retro gamers before retro gaming was even really a thing. Back when you could buy a box of Nintendo cartridges at a flea market for dirt cheap, which is what they used to do back in the day. And that's how James, collected, and that's how Mike helped, and they collected all of these old NES games to review, because you could get them for like 50 cents. But it was Mike who was really into the gaming, and it was Mike who was very vocal and loud whenever he would play video games, and he would often get angry when he would play them. And so really, I think the nerd character was kind of a parody of Motherfucker Mike. Also, he inspired a Letterman sketch once.
Here we go. Dear Dave, why does every talk show have a city skyline in the back? Sincerely, Mike Matei. That's a good question also, Mike. I never really gave it much thought, but that's pretty much New York City back there. And let's see if we can take a look. Can you get right in there? Bring that camera in there. Let's look in the window of that building. To see the kind of the brown, yeah, right there. Let's get right in there and see what the hell. Oh, it looks like somebody, well, close. Close.
Mike used to play characters like the Joker, Bugs Bunny, and the Cowardly Lion in the nerd videos. And the gimmick would be that, you know, the nerd would play the game, and then the character from the game would come in to harass him while he's playing the game. So he's already angry from playing a bad game, but then the character would just come in and annoy him. And Mike was great at playing these characters because he could capture all the most characteristic attributes of these characters while also heightening the ways in which those attributes could be annoying.
Batman! Batman, you want to play a really shitty Nintendo game, Batman? Well, how about Return of the Joker on the Nintendo Entertainment System, Batman? Yeah, what's up, there?
The nook and a fuck and a fuck.
Hey man, did you just swear?
Yeah, fuck you, dick.
But it wasn't until James started his Board James series that Motherfucker Mike was properly introduced.
Let me introduce Motherfucker Mike.
Motherfucker Mike.
And they called him Motherfucker Mike because he was supposed to be that one kid who cheats at every board game.
Hey, stop touching my balls!
After this, Mike started appearing a lot more on the website and the YouTube channel as himself, doing a lot of videos about retro gaming, and he even had a short-lived movie review series, which I think is pretty underrated, called Motherfucking Mondays. But that's when people started getting tired of Mike, because up to that point, James was still untouchable. People still thought he was a genius for his work on The Nerd. And so, with him making fewer nerd videos, focusing on other things like making his movie, for instance, Mike constantly butting his head in with his weird little annoying laugh and his kind of immature sense of humor, it did irritate a lot of people. And I distinctly remember seeing a comment on the Cinemassacre website where a guy was telling James to make more nerd videos, and he said verbatim, "Nobody gives a fuck about Mike." Which is funny because these days people are pining for the days when Mike was still on the channel. But Mike's antics and behavior did put a lot of people off, including the Archfiend, who used to make videos criticizing Mike for his censoring people's negative YouTube comments.
Mike the Coward Matei decided to go with the all-out censorship route here, and the reason why I'm bringing this to people's attention is that couple days since this happened and people just don't care. People just take the attitude of, well, we have to give him a pass. It's James Rolfe. Mike the Coward Matei uploaded a review of a kids movie, Elmo in Grouchland. By the way, that video is still on Cinemassacre's website if you want to see it, because you can't see it on the James Nintendo Nerd channel anymore because it got removed. Now, right away, the video started getting negative criticism because people thought it sucked. And here's a news flash, Mike the Coward Matei. The review did suck. The video got negative criticism right away. Immediately, the comments went to pending approval. Then the video itself, it didn't get a majority of thumbs downs, but it got a significant amount of thumbs downs. A ratio of thumbs downs that was much greater than anything else on the James Nintendo Nerd channel. Enough that you could see that solid block of red pushing into that block of green. And we all know when that starts getting bigger and bigger, we can't have that. So Mike goes ahead and disables ratings on the video. All within hours of the video being posted. He couldn't handle the fact that people were criticizing him. A channel built on criticism, be it of video games, of shit like Shoelaces and Change and whatever else is in that You Know It's Bullshit series. All those criticisms of movies, picking on shitty movies, picking on good movies, it doesn't matter. Now, when the criticism is turned in their way, or excuse me, towards them, they can't handle it. Immediately, censorship, censorship, censorship. Only positive comments. What are you, Joseph Stalin? No, excuse me. Joseph Stalin was actually respected by a few of his people. Mike Matei's just a cowardly piece of shit.
But eventually, Mike did something beyond the pale, which incited a big hullabaloo that eventually resulted in this subreddit's creation. He showed a picture of his big, juicy, meaty hog on Twitter. If I could show it on YouTube, you would have seen a picture of a giant, glorious 10-incher. I mean, just trust me. It's so like, why did this happen? The whole thing started because this picture of James and Mike at Universal Studios getting on the King Kong ride started circulating on Reddit, and people noticed that there was something rather unusual going on in the trousers of Mr. Matei. While this was no cause for alarm, really, because it was just the folds in Mike's trousers giving the illusion of a certain article of anatomy, granting Mr. Matei a certain advantage, people started joking about it and memeing about it on the subreddit, and Mike, in his usual fashion, started censoring comments. Yeah, apparently Mike has never heard of the Streisand effect, because apparently people talking about his giant penis was just too much for little old Mike. But then, weirdly, his next move is like, okay, I'm gonna do something you did not expect by then posting a picture of this article on Twitter with a tape measure next to it, just to show how much I don't want you talking about it. But what's really embarrassing is that people found out this wasn't even Mike's penis. He found it was just like a picture he found on the internet. So Mike just posted a picture of some random person's penis on the Cinemassacre Twitter. So that is what started this whole subreddit, because people couldn't have a conversation about this on the main subreddit because Mike kept deleting their comments. So people created this subreddit, The Truth About Mike's Penis. And that's how we got that. And then people, after that, it became kind of a Mike hate subreddit for a while. And so people started figuring out that Mike had this past where he used to make this webcomic called The Loco Bandito, which was full of a bunch of racist jokes and poop jokes. And it was really embarrassing. And they found out that Mike not only deleted the website, he tried so hard to erase the existence of this comic from the internet, going even so far as to contact the people at archive.org to get his website removed from the archives in the Wayback Machine. And to this day, the Loco Bandito is still the mascot of this subreddit. Mike eventually left the site in 2020 with surprisingly little fanfare. James just made this small announcement in one of his videos saying, hey, Mike is leaving the channel. He's going to focus on streaming full time now. It seemed really weird for somebody who had been so instrumental in the creation of this channel and so important to it for the last 14 years would just suddenly leave out of the blue with not even a big goodbye. And there are reasons for that. And I think the main reason is that Mike didn't actually leave the channel. In fact, he still owns a part of Cinemassacre, as was recently explained by Kieran, a disgruntled member of the Cinemassacre crew who recently quit. So with Mike still owning part of Cinemassacre, he still does contribute some work to maintaining Cinemassacre, particularly in providing gameplay footage for the Angry Nerd episodes. But that's weird, because if Mike is playing the actual video games for the nerd episodes, then what is James doing? Is he writing the script based on a game that somebody else played for him? Because James still claims that he writes the scripts for the videos, but it was revealed that he actually doesn't, because that same guy, Kieran, who I was talking about, he actually he was like the lead writer of the Nerd when he was on the team, but they're just kind of keeping it hush-hush, like, don't talk about that. Don't talk about the fact that James doesn't write the videos. Like, it's kind of weird, this sort of, they're trying to maintain this illusion that James is in control of the show, and it doesn't really seem like he is anymore. But Mike leaving the show happened around the same time when a lot of people involved with Cinemassacre were leaving, including Kyle Justin, the guitar guy who lived behind the nerd's couch.
The angry video game nerd.
Battletoads on Nintendo. Now don't worry, it's a good game. It's actually one of the most memorable games in the NES library. But when it first came out, a lot of people were thinking, what is this, a cheap Ninja Turtles knockoff or something? But it was actually pretty good. Who the fuck are you?
I'm your guitar guy. I sing your theme song from behind the couch.
Well then go back behind the damn couch! Jeez.
You know, that's not the welcome I really expect.
Oh, look, you can't just sit here while I do the review.
Why can't I do the review with you?
Oh, because that's not how it works. It's like, I play the game, and you get your ass back behind the fucking couch!
Kyle Justin is a really cool guy. He wrote and performed the theme song to The Angry Video Game Nerd, which is very iconic. And he also was one of the most important people in James's personal life. And according to James's book, Kyle really helped him come out of his shell during college. Or rather, his narcoleptic cocoon. And then there was Bad Luck Bootsy, who was introduced in the Tornado Rex episode of Board James as that one weird degenerate kid who fucks everything and fucks everything up.
Hey guys, can I play?
Bad Luck Bootsy?
Oh, Bad Luck Bootsy.
You had to
He's
jinx
an
it.
asshole.
He's a duty head.
That dude like fucked a frog one time.
Fuckface.
He's an idiot.
He sucks his own dick.
Oh, come on.
Ugh. Bootsy. You know, that one time I almost had that Rubik's Cube solved till you came along and fucked it up.
It was an honest mistake. I'm a boob sometimes. What can I say?
Whoa. You can play
Honestly.
the game, but wait.
Oh,
Whoa. Be careful with that thing.
And Bootsy, just like Justin, was also a very talented musician, and he wrote and composed and performed these theme songs, these kind of commercial jingle theme songs for the board games that they played in the Board James episodes that are so catchy that they still get stuck in my head all the time. And they sound like they were made for the actual commercials back in the day.
First player who guesses their secret admirer wins the game.
Both Kyle and Bootsy did a decent amount of behind-the-scenes work on Cinemassacre, with Kyle actually building that whole set that they destroyed during the Angry Nerd episode with Keith, the Christmas episode. That episode gets a lot of hate, but I don't really understand why, because to me it's just like an episode of Board James. It's more of like a Board James style thing than a nerd thing, and I think it works really well. I find it really funny and charming, and most of all, it's doing something different than how we usually see the nerd, which I personally appreciate, you know, variety. But there was some drama over Kyle and Bootsy leaving the site when people found out that they weren't exactly getting paid for their work, allegedly. According to Mike, he was actually paying Bootsy, and Bootsy left the channel because he and Mike started not getting along for personal reasons. They had a falling out, which led a lot of people to passing around this rumor that Bootsy, you know, he fucked Mike's girlfriend, which didn't happen, by the way, but like, you know, people just love their rumors. But it was just a complicated thing because, like, Bootsy came out with a comment on the subreddit explaining that the truth was in the middle. Like, he was getting paid for some of the work, but he wasn't getting compensated for other work. And then when he brought those concerns up to Mike, he was met with hostility. But then Mike made another clarifying post saying that he was actually more reasonable than he was being portrayed by Bootsy. But a lot of people, I think most people tend to side with Bootsy on this rather than Mike. I personally don't know, and I just don't care, because it's like, it's at the point where it's so complicated that, like, there's clearly a lot of nuance going on here, and I don't really know. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Who cares? Bootsy left the site, and it's all Mike's fault, I guess. But it's just sad because everyone liked Kyle and everyone liked Bootsy. Like, they were actually, unlike Mike and now James, people actually really respected both of them. And so with them gone from the channel kind of loses a little bit of its respectability. The next guy I want to talk about is Big Ryan. He was actually working with Cinemassacre on their website as early as 2009, doing kind of, web maintenance work, I think. But nobody had really heard of him until a lot later on in around 2017, when he started appearing on the channel with Mike in a series called Talk About Games. Ryan showed himself to be a very knowledgeable person about gaming technology and gaming history, and so he actually provided a lot of good perspective on that show. And it was actually a pretty entertaining show, like a surprisingly entertaining show, I think. For someone like me who actually is a lot more interested in the history of video games than, actually playing them. For some reason, this meme started relating to Big Ryan. He doesn't go by Big Ryan in the way that, like, Mike goes by Motherfucker Mike. Bootsy is Bad Luck Bootsy. People just call him Big Ryan for some reason. I like it. But, like, there's this meme on the subreddit where people are like, Big Ryan fan, by the way. So, like, whenever you bring up Ryan, you have to put in parentheses, Big Ryan fan, or big fan, by the way. I don't even know where that started. I just find it funny. Like, we're all fans of Ryan, I guess. After Mike supposedly left the site, he kept working with Ryan on Talk About Games. But eventually, people started to notice something a bit different about Ryan. Yeah, his hair was a little bit longer, and he was shaving his face a lot more frequently, and he was starting to wear these really low cut, revealing shirts. Big Ryan, husband and father, mind you, was slowly transitioning into a woman. Which is a little bit weird. I mean, am I wrong for thinking that's kind of fucking weird? Like, imagine you're a kid and then your dad becomes your mom. Shortly after this, they ended the podcast, and Ryan said this about the situation. He said, I guess my only statement is I wish I could have kept making the show. It's just so hard with game studio work, the agency work, the convention work, the arcade work, etc. And then someone replied, explain the blouse, though. To which he said, as far as the personal stuff, yeah, there's been changes. I'm still figuring it all out, honestly. No statements, no plans. I have a lot of inner conflict. Maybe not best to be a public persona. This comment was actually met with quite a lot of approval and nodding respect from the community, because people are like, okay, yeah, a little bit weird, but, like, at least you're handling this off screen, you're not, like, putting all this out for everyone to see. You're going through weird personal stuff and you're keeping it to yourself, so we can at least respect that. But as Big Ryan is, he's only the very tip of the big boy iceberg, because Ryan is in charge of a company called Retro, which used to be called Screenwave, or, as it is affectionately known on the subreddit, Slobwave. See, around 2018 or 2019, these fat guys just started showing up in James's videos all the time on a new show called Rental Reviews, and as actors in the Angry Video Game Nerd episodes, and on the short-lived charisma vacuum called the Cinemassacre podcast. A lot of us were confused about who these guys were, And we just kind of thought that they were friends of James who we hadn't seen before, you know, because he has friends, you know, he's a normal person, right? He has friends. So we just thought, hey, these are friends and they're joining him, helping him out with his videos now. But no, actually, these were hired talent because all of these guys were actually employees of Big Ryan's company, Screenwave. Now, usually multi-channel networks like Maker Studios and Machinima have a bad reputation because they make all these promises like they're gonna protect your channel when it's under attack, and they're gonna hook you up with connections and get you sponsors and better ad revenue. And then what really just happens is that they do nothing for you and pocket your money. But this was a different situation with Screenwave because they were a local network who worked very closely with James and Mike on Cinemassacre and clearly invested a lot into Cinemassacre as one of their big cash cows. But still, people couldn't help but notice a downturn in the quality of the videos once the Fat Boys came into the picture. And that ended up leading to the affectionate nickname they've been given on the subreddit, the Slobs. When I first saw that people were calling these guys the Slobs, I thought it was so funny that I couldn't get over it for like 2 weeks. Every time I thought about it, I would laugh. It was actually very similar to the feeling I had after Donald Trump was elected president. It sounded like the Blob or something. It was like these guys were aliens in human form who were like threatening to just eat and consume Cinemassacre's essence, like just sucking the channel dry of all of its passion and creativity and just like filling their gaping maws with what used to be a great YouTube channel. Yum! That's what I think of when I think the Slobs. I also just think slob is a funny word, and it's an insult that I don't hear very often, and so it fits them because, you know, they're kind of fat neckbeard dudes. They do kind of look like slobs. And, you know, people were getting bored about talking about Mike. And so when the Slobs came in, it was just a feast for them. So the subreddit really transitioned from being mostly about Mike to being mostly about the Slobs. So why don't I introduce the Slobs to you? We'll start with the fattest. We'll start with Justin Silverman, also known as Justy, Crusty Justy, or Lusty Justy. This man was clearly the largest addition to the group, weighing in at over 300 pounds. He was so large that he couldn't even sit on a single chair. He had to have 2 chairs. So a long time ago, Justin made a video where he was... Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna play it.
Here on the Racist Video Game Nerd, I only play games that are good, which are also games that are racist. Today I'm playing one of the most racist video games of all time, Ethnic Cleansing.
I don't know what he was thinking either. And then there's all this stuff where Justin was friends with this old sex offender.
So I figured you'd like this game.
Wow. I love Mary Kate and Ashley. They're the best. Yeah, I was wondering if I could call the Real Doll Company and get real dolls made up of Mary, Kate, and what's the other one's name?
Ashley?
Ashley?
like how they are nowadays or when they were young?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that up to you to figure it out.
Now, this is actually the same joke that Red Letter Media made with their Harry Plinkett character, but the difference is that Harry Plinkett is a character. He's basically a cartoon. He's extremely exaggerated. He has this cartoony voice. He's this like ancient 130-year-old slob who's really fat and just eats pizza rolls in his dingy basement. But this guy is an actual sex offender, so you know when he's making these jokes that he actually means it and that he's actually describing his real feelings. Even if he's joking about it, he's being like legit about it at the same time. And this led to a lot of jokes about how James shouldn't be letting Crusty Justy be around his kids. And that's not all. Justin also made this tweet back in 2013.
I'm a pedophile. Watch out!
Excuse me? Like, is this supposed to be some sort of a joke? Because it's not funny, and I'm not just saying that because it's not politically correct. I mean, it's like, actually, like, I don't get the joke. Justin claims that he was hacked by one of his friends at a party. Somebody like got onto his computer and like hacked into his Twitter and posted this in order to humiliate him as a prank. And that's like the oldest excuse in the book. So many people have made that excuse before. But in this case, I'm actually kind of wondering if it's true, because like it does not make any sense why he would post this at all. Better have been somebody pulling a prank on him, because what? And then he has this obsession with this one particular Pokemon named Gengar. And when I say obsession, I mean like... Stop it. Just stop it, okay? I don't know what you think you're doing, but just stop. And then there's Rex Viper, also known as Rex Diaper, or just simply Wet Diaper. Rex Viper is a midlife crisis style 80s dad rock band that James started a few years ago and is notable for being one of the reasons why Mike left the channel. One of the stated reasons. He said that one of the reasons he was leaving is because James wanted to focus more on music. And this is the music he was making. Oh, yeah. James did this there was this very memorable moment at, I think it was the first ever Rex Viper show, where James did this move with his guitar that people have been obsessed with this move. They've been calling it the duck walk, even though there already is a thing called the duck walk, and it actually looks kind of cool. But when James does this like back and forth, there's just something hilarious about it. And that has actually led to people looking at the way that James walks just in general and finding that actually James kind of walks like a duck anyway. This is a thing called supination or supination, I think. And it's where your feet kind of go out like this when you walk. This gif of James walking forward in the Dragon in My Dreams video has been passed around the subreddit a bunch of times and turned into a bunch of different memes. And then it's especially concerning when James runs, like when he ran up the Rocky Steps in Philadelphia, or when he's seen running in his Head Returns video. A lot of people are really uncomfortable watching James run because they think that it looks really painful on his feet. I love this level of attention to detail that people are putting into things, because like as time goes on the subreddit, there's fewer and fewer, you know, sources of meme material that people can draw from, and so people are just kind of digging down into like the nitty-gritty details of things, and then they're hyper fixating on things like the way James walks. And so anyway, about Rex Viper seems to be one of the few things that James is actually legitimately interested in these days, which upsets a lot of people because they just feel like it's such a waste of time to be investing so much passion into a project that's clearly dead on arrival. But eventually the band decided that Justin just wasn't pulling his weight around, so they let him go. And Justin has gotten some credit in the community for doing an AMA on the subreddit where he answered everyone's questions, which is probably not something that everybody would do. It shows that Justin has a little bit of, thick skin about him. But a lot of people still continue to hate Justin, and they really take these, sex offender things really seriously, and they've investigated a bunch of stuff. I don't really think that there's a lot there. I don't think that there's really a whole lot of reason to hate Justin, but people tend to be very hyperbolic. But what I can say about Justin is that he seems to understand the internet a little bit better than the next guy on our list, Caveman Kieran. One thing that you gotta point out about Caveman Kieran is that he really does not like being called Caveman. And he really doesn't like any of the hate around Screenwave and the slobs. And he's just kind of a salty guy. And people kind of do feel bad for Caveman Kieran because he's clearly someone who didn't expect that getting a job at a multi-channel network was going to make him the target of a whole bunch of criticism and memes, including this meme where someone put him in the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot footage. The story of Caveman Kieran is the story of a man who went into a job with good intentions and came out of it with nothing but regrets. It's a sad story. According to him, Screenwave was a really tough boss. They gave him way too much work. They expected too much of him. They didn't reward him for his successes, and they got mad at him when videos underperformed. He did a lot of writing work and editing work for the nerd episodes. While James was busy spending time with his kids, Kieran was up all night working past 5:40, doing the work that James was theoretically supposed to be the one doing, and he wasn't getting any credit for it. Eventually, it got way too much for him, and he left in an absolute huff, posting drunk rants on Twitter and making angry live streams. He did not take it well. And as bad as people felt for Kieran, people also recognized that when Kieran was around, the nerd episodes were at their lowest point in terms of quality. And so with Kieran out of the picture, it brought back a little bit of hope that perhaps the channel could recover a bit. And that seems to have been slightly borne out in the fact that the recent Indiana Jones nerd episode got some pretty good attention when it came out. So I guess the moral of the story is don't saddle all of the back-breaking creative labor of a beloved series on the back of one overworked, stressed out man who doesn't really have the talent to hold it up. It's bad business, and it ended up with Screenwave's reputation getting dragged through the mud by a disgruntled employee who went postal. There's other slobs I could talk about, like Tony, who, the thing I remember from him the most was when he went savage on Justin, just roasting him at the end of the Scott Pilgrim rental review because Justin insisted that he be on the episode instead of Tony because he worked at a movie theater when Scott Pilgrim came out, even though Tony is actually familiar with the comic books that Scott Pilgrim was based on, and so he knows about the actual source material of it.
Hi guys, Tony here. Sorry I wasn't in this review. Justin thought it was more important that he would be in the review because he had experience being a projectionist the weekend the movie came out, So he was clearly the better choice over me, Tony, who has read all 6 books, knows the differences between the books and the movie, such as the Asian twins being engineers who build robots or change the DJs that have mystical dragons because there were too many robot movies out at the time. It's more important he was in the review over me, someone who knows about subplots that were omitted from the film, like Knives Chow's dad hunting down Scott. Justin really had some good insight because he knew Eat, Pray, Love came out the same weekend as Scott Pilgrim, so he clearly needed to be in the review. Not Tony, who actually did a video that was reblogged by Edgar Wright. You can watch that somewhere here. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed his insights into the film, such as Expendables came out the same weekend. and how he wanted Scott to end up with knives, even though the whole point of the story is that Scott needs to mature and take a risk in future relationships and get over his ex, and dating a high school girl is kind of just taking the safe way out. But, you know, Justin knows his stuff. I guess being with knives is the better ending, even though it contradicts the entire point of the movie. Okay, guys, I'll see you next week. Bye.
That was pretty funny. But really, the slobs, when you get right down to it, they're not very interesting, because they're just, you know, they're just average neckbeardy millennials who, you know, they're nice. They're pretty decent people, nice people, honestly. Like, there's nothing really that interesting about them. And so they couldn't really maintain their position as the big sort of target for drama on the subreddit for a very long. And so the subreddit started turning toward really the person who deserved this negative attention the whole time anyway. They finally started to touch the untouchable James. They finally started to realize that, hey, maybe if James's channel is suffering and James is the one who's supposed to be in control of the channel, maybe it's James's fault that the channel is suffering. And this is where the majority of this video is gonna reside, is on James himself, because as much material as there was about Mike and Bootsy and Kyle and the slobs, there is probably 5 times as much material just about James, because the more people dug into James just psychoanalyzing him and thinking about him, the more people realized how interesting he really is to talk about. Recontextualizing the problem of Cinemassacre as being about James rather than the people around James has led people to kind of recontextualize Cinemassacre as a whole and wonder, was James ever really that good? And seeing how Mike was clearly, you know, one of the big inspirations for the nerd character, and he was so intimately involved in creating the YouTube channel, people have started to think how much of the nerd really was the creation of James and how much of it was the creation of Mike. Because people are starting to put it together that Mike was recording a lot of the gameplay even back then, and Mike also probably helped in writing a lot of the jokes back then, because he and James would play the games together and talk about them, and people are starting to wonder how much of those episodes were written by James and how much of them were written by Mike. How much of the work has been done by Mike because James just hasn't had the time. And that's an important aspect of the whole James Rolfe scheme, is his relationship with time.
I get asked all the time if I have plans to continue Board James. Unfortunately, no, but the reason I'm not continuing is because, first of all, I don't have time. Because honestly, I just don't have the time. Time sucks. Nobody likes time.
Exactly.
I can't afford to sacrifice the amount of time it takes to make an entire movie from start to finish.
There doesn't exist enough time in the year to keep doing a full 31 review marathon.
I typically stick to movies. I'm not much of a TV person, and the simple reason is because I don't have time. Yeah, I mean, these kind of games, it helps to have some practice runs and to, you know, learn the moves first and get used to it, but we don't have that kind of time right now, so we're just jumping into it.
So something that happened with me that was kind of unusual was that I played a video game, which I don't have that much time to play video game.
Yeah, like wrestling, like for me it was like something where like I don't know, I never had the time to get into it, but I always kind of had, you know, an appeal for it, but I never, you know, just took the time to watch it, you know?
I have other things I need to do right now. I don't think I have time to do that.
Cool.
You didn't see the new movie, did you?
No, I don't know when I'm gonna get time because there's just too much stuff.
I gotta watch like 20 horror movies for Monster Madness. I don't even know how I'm gonna do it. But I always wanted to have a breakaway prop in a movie, and there wasn't really time to do it, so I didn't really get a chance for this.
Time.
That's not enough time!
James is always using time as an excuse for why he can't do more things. He just doesn't have the time. James has a very strict workflow for his day, and he always has to end his day at 5:40 p.m. He cannot go past that, even if it doesn't make sense to not go past it. Like, there was a very infamous video, which people call the 5:40 incident, where James and Mike were getting to the end of a video game, and then James is like, "It's 5:40, I gotta go."
Well, anyway, that's it. We just ran out of time because I have to be done at 5:40 right now.
Now, obviously, James has kids who are still pretty young. I think his oldest is 9 years old, and so they're still going to bed pretty early, and so he still wants to have time to spend with them. So 5:40 is a big meme on the subreddit, and also "my kids" is a big meme because James is always using his kids as an excuse for why he doesn't have more time. There are a lot of Cinemassacre truthers who are parents and have criticized James because they have found no trouble fitting in, you know, their kids and their work life and their hobbies all in one life. Actually, a couple of the guys who are most prominent in the community, the Red Cow Arcade fellows, they have kids, and they talk about, you know, they've got their regular day jobs, they've got their kids, and they do their Red Cow videos, and that's just a hobby. They don't live off of that, and yet they still find the time to keep putting out a lot of Red Cow videos and putting effort into them. So maybe the fact that James never has time for anything isn't just because he has kids. Maybe he just has a bad work-life balance, which, to be fair, I mean, that's not his fault necessarily. I mean, not everybody is gifted with that sort of thing. I'm not myself. In fact, I have used the no time excuse several times. But one good thing you can say about James is that he loves his kids. He really loves his kids. And that's great. And one thing that the guys on the subreddit give him credit for is that he never shows his kids in his videos. He keeps them off screen, except for the one time when he had his first kid and he showed a couple of baby pictures on one of his update videos, because he was so excited about it. But he was, you know, he was pretty adamant that he wouldn't keep showing a bunch of pictures of his kids and that he would keep that off screen. And so that's good. He never became one of those family vloggers who exploits his children for attention and money. So James is all around a good dad. But it seems like being a dad is more interesting to him now than being a YouTuber, which, at this point, maybe that's a good thing, because all we see is this lazy sack of potatoes who's farmed all of his labor out to other people and just has to show up and do his thing and then go home, not putting any creativity into his work anymore. And to us, that looks really lame. A guy who just refuses to challenge himself and is just giving up and going through the motions. But think about those movies like You Can't Take It With You, or A Christmas Carol, or heck, even Breaking Bad, one of Bimmy's favorite movies. Think about those movies and think about what the message is in those movies. The message of all these movies is that, you know, family, la familia es todo.
La familia es todo.
Hector Salamanca was really a good person because he understood that family is everything. That this money and these careers, you know, these are great, but like, what does it amount you in the end? A big stack of gold. That does not replace what you can build if you put energy into the people around you, living with a generous spirit. So even if we criticize James for phoning it in professionally, we can at least acknowledge that he knows what really matters in his own life. But I think a lot of what causes the frustration around James's career is that he inspired so many people with his drive to be a filmmaker. He inspired a lot of people with his innovativeness in this new field. And his story was so inspirational to people that they invested themselves a lot in this idea of James as the low-budget dream. You know, I think it's the No Budget Dream was that movie, that short film that Bootsy made about him in college. This was a guy who was obsessed with old monster movies as a kid and obsessively made home movies as a kid, went to film school, studied animation. And so people look at this guy and they want him to have a fulfilling filmmaking career. And for my money, he has had one. It's just not the one that he imagined he would have when he was a kid. I mean, how many people can say that they pioneered a whole new medium of entertainment? Not very many. But James is one of the people who can say that. And it must not have really felt like that to James at the time, but that's really what he was doing. And it took someone like James to do that, somebody with the skills and experience needed to bring a real underground amateur, but also skilled and experienced energy to pioneering this new form of entertainment, because nobody was doing things like what James was doing at the time. He was really one of a kind. He pushed the boundaries of what was possible in this format, and he became, you know, one of the leading figures in a budding new form of business enterprise. What I'm saying is that James Rolfe is already a success story. He doesn't need to become a real filmmaker, because he's already invested his life into making work that is very dear to many people's hearts and has an important place in the history of entertainment. And yet I can't help but feel that James doesn't quite see it that way. He still wants to be something other than what he is, a real filmmaker in some sense. And I think that's why he idolizes Lloyd Kaufman so much. Lloyd would produce these shoestring budget schlock horror movies like The Toxic Avenger all by himself. And then he would also lend some executive help to still low budget, but also critically acclaimed projects like Saturday Night Fever and My Dinner with Andre. And through it all, he maintained his very charming sense of humor. This, I think, is everything that James wanted to be. You know, he wanted to be somebody who's a true movie-making professional, but doing it in his own way by scraping together whatever resources he can come up with to make movies in the way that he wanted to make them.
Also, don't like the color yellow also then.
Well, I think they don't like trauma. They don't. The purpose of the MPAA rating board is not to protect the public from movies. It's to protect the big studios from competition from people like the angry movie nerd, the movie game nerd. I mean, the angry video game nerd. I took a lot of acid in the 60s.
And this raises the question, why didn't James get involved with Troma Entertainment? Why didn't he use his connection to Lloyd Kaufman to actually break into the film industry in the way he wanted to? Well, I think the answer to that is that James started to realize that he wasn't really cut out for that kind of work. And I think at no point was that made clearer to him than when he finally accomplished his dream in making a full-length feature film, The Angry Video Game Nerd Movie. The movie was scripted in 2010 by him and Kevin Finn, and to his credit, he did actually put a lot of effort into realizing the film a mere 4 years later, which is an impressive turnaround for somebody who didn't have a lot of experience and didn't have any connections in the area that he was working in except for Kevin Finn. He did a lot of fundraising, including crowdfunding, and he moved out to Hollywood to make his movie. And that was probably the first mistake and the biggest mistake of the whole project, going to Hollywood.
Read my lips. Hollywood. You know, Hollywood, the Dream Factory, the Magic Store. Hey, don't you ever go to the movies?
The problem with Hollywood is that it's very expensive, especially if you're trying to shoot a movie. And so he ended up getting scalped by a lot of people, including the California Tax Service, and he lost about $100,000 on taxes that could have been avoided if he had just hired an accountant who knew how to finance a low-budget movie. And while I do enjoy seeing James work with these cheesy low-budget special effects using toy cars and kaiju costumes, What I don't like to see is a movie that's supposed to be taking place in a room, but they're just clearly on a green screen. Like, you couldn't have shot the fucking thing in a room. You couldn't get a goddamn motherfucking room to shoot in. You had to put them on a green screen and then key out the background with an image of a room. Like, what? And so much of this movie looks like that. So much of it looks super unprofessional, super amateur because of their reliance on green screen. And green screen should not be used if you're working on a low budget. It should only be used when it absolutely has to be. Otherwise, it's gonna look terrible. The toy cars and the kaiju costumes, those have a charm to them. Green screen doesn't have a charm to it. It just looks like Birdemic. This movie's a shitload of fuck, and it was both a critical and commercial flop. He sunk a ton of money into it and a ton of time. He got nothing out of it, and it didn't give him any respect in the filmmaking world. And in fact, his reputation ended up being more like Tommy Wiseau than Lloyd Kaufman. And also, it was just really hard to make because James, with very little experience in this kind of work, he's a very sensitive person. This is something that becomes clear the more you learn about him. James Rolfe is very sensitive. He's prone to anxiety. And so a lot of the work directing the movie ended up going to Kevin Finn, who had actual experience in the film industry. I actually do think it was a really good idea to make a movie about the nerd, but I think that this was the wrong way to do it. It should have been shot in New Jersey for starters. And he should have made it a smaller movie just about the character of the nerd, his day-to-day life, what it's like, giving you a better glimpse of what it's like to actually be the nerd. And we know that he lives in this kind of cartoon reality where there's all these wacky characters intruding on his life all the time. He could also do this kind of Ferris Bueller thing where he's talking to the camera all the time, because that's what he does all the time in his videos, and it would help the movie feel more like the videos. But in the movie that he ended up making, he made the nerd character into this celebrity, and I just don't get it because, like, obviously the nerd had fans in the show, like the weird guy, the crackhead who came into his house during the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video.
Cool.
Whoa, man! So is this where you do all your videos?
Yeah.
Whoa, would you be able to give me a tour or something?
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the games. You see, here's the games, and here, all the systems are right here, and that's it. So the tour's over. You can go.
Yeah. Whoa, that's far out. Your next game review is gonna be E.T., right?
No.
But he was never really shown to be a super famous person. He was always shown to just be a guy in his basement. And so I just think it's a little bit weird for him to just suddenly have like all of these screaming fans adoring him. Like, that doesn't really feel like the nerd to me. It feels like the nerd is the kind of guy who can just like, walk to the grocery store, pick up a jug of milk, walk back home, maybe have to deal with some wacky cartoon character trying to steal the milk away from him. It's that's the kind of movie I expect, like a more mundane movie, because the nerd ended up having to do all kinds of wacky things like fighting Rob the robot in that city environment. Like, the nerd does do these huge cosmic things, but there's always this sense of smallness to it. Like, in the end, none of it really mattered. I just don't think that the spirit of the nerd was really captured with this film. This movie could have been made a lot cheaper and a lot better if the script was a lot better. And he could have still premiered it at the Grauman's Egyptian Theater like he wanted, and he could have, toured it around to different film festivals as he did, but it could have actually gotten positive attention at those film festivals, and maybe it could have gotten him some attention from the industry. It just didn't have to turn out this way, is what I'm saying. But ever since then, James really hasn't had the ambition to make another full-length movie. and perhaps this was the experience that took the wind out of his sails. After the movie was released, he spent 2015 just working on Season 3 of Board Games, which is an impressive bounce back, because Season 3 of Board Games was actually a really entertaining project, and it kind of signaled maybe a return for the nerd, a return for James at least, even if he wasn't going to go back to doing the nerd like he used to. Although he did start doing the nerd again, and at a certain point it was just a slow descent into No Time, My Kids, Slob Wave, all of that stuff. It's just started this slow decline in quality. Not that there weren't good moments though. Like I remember the Christmas series that he did on bad video game art, cover art. That is one of my favorite things that he's ever done. I watched that. Like, that's like the only thing that I watch as a Christmas tradition, because I don't usually do those kinds of things, but for some reason that show does it for me. I just always want to watch that on Christmas because it's just so funny, and it's so different from anything that James has done before or since with the nerd character or outside the nerd character. It's taking from something that comes from his past, from being in art school, from having to listen to all these pretentious art lectures, but then he does these art lectures about bad video game cover art that are trying to analyze what's going on in the piece, and they're really funny. It's not that there weren't good episodes, it's just that the quality was slowly declining, and it got worse and worse, especially during the pandemic when he couldn't have anybody working closely with him on the videos, and so it was difficult for him to get the same kind of quality that he used to get with the different camera angles and creative effects. And that leads me to my next topic, the ridiculous behind-the-scenes video. There are a lot of memes on the subreddit that are just quotations from this one video. This video had crazy meme turnout. And James is a very quotable person in general. Like, the way he pronounces certain words has been joked about a lot. Like, he has very specific, odd ways of pronouncing things. Like, instead of berry, he says bury.
What am I doing wrong this time? It's bury, but everyone else says berry. It's spelled with a U. Why wouldn't it be bury?
Instead of review, he says review. Instead of Wolfman, he says Wolfman. Instead of horror, he says horror. It's really funny that a lot of these words are like words that he uses all the time because he makes videos about them. So like if he says I'm gonna bury this review of the horror movie The Wolfman, he goes, I'm gonna bury this review of the horror movie The Wolfman. One of the most infamous examples of this was when he did a video recently where he climbed the mountain that Rocky climbed in Rocky IV, and the problem is that he can't pronounce the word mountain, and so he keeps saying mountain.
Mountain. Mountain. Mountains. 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 Mountain. Mountain. Mountains. Mountain. 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 Mountains. 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 Mountain. 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 Mountain.
There's a bunch of other quotes from James that have become memes, like the title of that. He did this infamous video called Ghostbusters 2016. No review. I refuse. So a lot of times people will be like, no videos, I refuse. No effort, I refuse. They'll put like something in place of the word review. He also did a video about the Three Stooges where he got two different quotes that both became memes in the same sentence.
So anyway, like we said, we love the Three Stooges. We love everything about them. But just as a warning, though, and just to be serious for a minute, is that, as a curator of film, I feel responsible to let you know that as much as I recommend the Three Stooges, there are some of the shorts that contain racial stereotypes which are not funny whatsoever. No. And, they were wrong back then. They're wrong now. So that's just something as a word of precaution.
Oh, people just latched on to this idea that James is calling himself a curator of film. For some reason, this was the funniest thing to them, because for a long time, James called himself a filmmaker, but it seems like now he's less enthused about that. And so he's like, well, I'm a curator of film. And it just sounds ridiculous to people because they're like, dude, you don't watch movies, so how can you be a curator of film? The only movies James seems to know about are monster movies, stuff he watched when he was a kid, and stuff he watched in film school. But he's a curator of film. They also really latched onto this thing where James is like, it was wrong then and it's wrong now. You see that a lot on the subreddit, where if somebody brings up something bad, somebody will comment, it was wrong then and it's wrong now. And that's interesting because it kind of shows that this subreddit, it shows the subreddit's attitude toward things like political correctness, that these are not very politically correct people. These are not people who are going to kowtow to everyone's sensibilities. And it seems like they're a little bit more, understanding of maybe the sense of humor of things like the racial stereotyping in the Three Stooges shorts. Like I think the people on the subreddit are more of the opinion that, no, it might be wrong now, but that doesn't mean it was wrong then. Like, morality changes and evolves. So saying it was wrong then and it's wrong now, it's kind of ridiculous. I don't know, it just shows the mentality of the subreddit is all. That it demonstrates something about the way they think. But by far the biggest source of quotations, it comes from this one behind the scenes video. And this is the kind of video that people had actually been wanting from James for some time. They've been wanting a deeper look into what has actually been going on that's been causing this decline in quality. And James is aware that people have been talking about this. And so he adopts this kind of attitude in the video where he's trying to defend himself. And he's trying to show like, look guys, I get it. I get that you don't like my new videos, but this is the best I can do because I don't have time. And I have my kids. The top comment on this video says, this may be the most unintentionally hilarious video I've ever seen. That should tell you everything you need to know. This video really makes James look bad, not just because he's dodging criticism and maybe not taking criticism very well, but because the problems that he shows that he's been having and the solutions that he's come up with to solving those problems, they don't make you think, oh wow, this guy has a lot on his plate to deal with, we should give him a break. Instead, they just make him look incompetent at his job. And really, I'm not one to criticize too much because like I'm not a professional at this at all either. So I don't know, James knows a heck of a lot more about it than I do, but a lot of people have pointed out they have knowledge in this kind of work, especially the guys at Red Cow Arcade. And they've pointed out, like, actually, a lot of these problems you're having, there are pretty simple solutions to them. And so wasting a lot of time and man hours and energy on solving these problems when you could just use a simple solution, it doesn't make you look bad. It doesn't make you look good. It just kind of makes you look even lazier. Like you're working so hard to be as lazy as possible by not just putting in a little bit more effort to come up with a better solution. Like instead of thinking, oh wow, all these technical issues he's having, no wonder he can't make good nerd videos anymore. Instead, you're just thinking it's been 30 years of making these videos and you still can't hook up a goddamn microphone. So let's take a look at this video bit by bit, because it's really worth going through bit by bit.
Hey, guess what? I just realized
I recorded this entire video and realized this mic is not plugged in. The shotgun mic is plugged in. So, hey, at least you can still hear me, right? Back to the video.
So, bad start already. Even in making this video, he can't set up the microphone. When I said that, I wasn't even talking about this. I forgot that this moment was in there. I was talking about the part later in the video where he's talking about how he couldn't get his microphone to stop buzzing. That is an easy fix, I've heard. But he forgot to plug in his microphone. Luckily, it's not noticeable, so I don't know why he even brought it up. But it's just funny that, like, he begins this video by just showing rank incompetence.
I'll talk about some of the projects that you don't see, the ones that are all about maintenance, and I'll even address a few complaints of the asshole-ish variety.
Complaints of the asshole-ish variety. This is the most legendary James Rolfe quote ever. I love it. I love the snide sort of derisiveness of it. The people on the subreddit are the fans of the asshole-ish variety, basically. That's what they are to him. This became such a huge deal on the subreddit that they even made a Monster Madness, their own version of Monster Madness, called Monster Madness of the Asshole-ish Variety last year, with an AI-generated voice of James Rolfe, which it's interesting how much better AI voice generation has gotten in just 1 year, because this was last year and it already sounds like it was 10 years ago. I wish they'd maybe waited a year and used a better AI voice modulator, synthesizer, blah, blah, blah.
Hey, I'm Justin. It's Cinemassacre. Truth. It's Monster Madness of the asshole-ish variety. So, Screenwave hooked me up. They got me a new PC, and it's working awesome. It even has colored lights and shit. Strangely, this desk is from the 80s, had it since I was a kid, and back then they didn't consider that computer wires would ever have to go under here. So the entire bottom is boxed in. So for the first time ever, I had to drill a hole in it, which was surprisingly difficult. This was some really tough 80s wood.
So James gets a new computer from Screenwave, and in order to plug it in, he has to drill a hole through his 1980s desk. Okay, but what is going on with this hole? Did he use a tiny drill bit and then just make a bunch of little holes? Now, I've kind of had this problem before, because I've been in a situation where I had to drill some holes into some oak barrels for drainage, and I ended up using just a regular drill bit and drilling, you know, several lines of small holes. But the way I started was I thought, maybe I'll take one of these bits, these, what are they called? Spade bits, and then drill it like that. But the problem is that oak is really, really hard wood, and you can't drill it with the spade bit. It's just gonna make the holes like it's gonna like char them black from the amount of friction that it takes in order to drill these things. So I drilled a few holes with the spade bit, but then I gave up because what I didn't have was the right tool. If I had one, I would have used a saw bit, like a hole saw. I could use a hole saw, or another option is maybe a Forstner bit. But really, the hole saw to me seems like the right one, because it just cuts a hole around, you know, the circumference that you want to cut. But James, instead of, you know, going to a hardware store, because, you know, I'm not someone who could just go to a hardware store. I didn't have a car or a driver's license, so I couldn't do that back then. James has a car and a driver's license. He could have just gone to Home Depot and bought himself a hole saw, but instead he decides to spend like an hour drilling tiny holes into his desk with a regular drill bit. See what I mean about him finding the most convoluted solutions to every simple problem? But then what makes it all the better is that he puts this into his video, trying to make it look like, yo, look at this big freaking problem that I have drilling this hole in my desk. And then everyone with a brain is looking at it like, dude, just buy a hole saw.
So lots of my work hours in general is spent fixing things that go wrong. And these are just a few examples off the top of my head. Earlier this year, I had a hard drive issue. For the past few years, I've used a server with 24 hard drives in it that stores all my past videos and project files. That's in case I ever need to go back and grab a clip from something or whatever. I'm obsessive about organizing. I have a folder for finished videos and a folder for project files, raw footage, graphics, everything else. Inside these folders are AVGN, BJ, which is Board James, Monster Madness, and everything else. Folder within folder within folder. It's all stored on one big volume, so I don't have to switch out and unplug different hard drives to find shit. Well, earlier this year, the server stopped working. It just wouldn't stay mounted. So for the next few weeks, I was using my backup drives and copying everything onto bigger drives. I could never fully explain how time-consuming and mentally exhausting this was. I had to draw plans of where I was going to copy everything to. You can see here how long it was taking to copy lots of this stuff. I probably have like 80 terabytes of crap when you add it all up. I'm not even sure, to be honest. When just one folder says it's going to take 7 days, you know you're in for a long haul. To make things more complicated, earlier this year, around the same time, I got a new Mac. My current Mac was from 2014, and in the world of computers and video editing, that's pretty old. So I was having lots of problems with Adobe Premiere. I still do, which is what I use to edit. I don't use Final Cut anymore because Apple hasn't updated that since since the iPhone probably. There's Final Cut X, but that's like a totally different thing. So anyway, I got a new Mac, new version of Premiere, everything's all updated, but it was like a month of installing programs, reorganizing my data, and after all was said and done, my old server suddenly works again. It turned out it was just a bad Thunderbolt wire, an 18-foot wire that cost 215 bucks. It's that long because the server's loud and I like putting it in a different room than I edit in. But hey, now all my stuff is super backed up.
So, let me get this straight. James spent all this time, months, trying to copy, a task that probably shouldn't have taken months, trying to copy his entire server, or what was on his server, onto separate hard drives. When he could have just bought a new Thunderbolt wire, he copied his entire server because he had a bad wire. You know, if I had a problem where my server kept disconnecting and reconnecting, you know what I would check first? I would check the wire because that's where it connects. And he didn't even have to immediately shell out the $200 for a new Thunderbolt wire. He could have bought a smaller Thunderbolt wire and then tested it out just to see if the connection was the problem. There are solutions to these things, my dude. And by the way, this whole thing could have probably been outsourced to one of his slobs. I mean, isn't that what he has them for? To help him with this kind of technical work? I mean, they bought him the computer. They hooked up his Ethernet, that whole thing, you know? They could probably copy his hard drives, is all I'm saying. I also kind of question the need for him to have so much data, like 80 terabytes of data on his hard drives. Like, can you get rid of some of it? Can you, like, weed out some of it? I'm sure he doesn't need all of it.
But still, there's a problem. The old server doesn't work with the new Mac, so Screenwave set me up with a whole new server. So yes, that meant copying everything again, but at least it was all onto one big volume and easier to organize than if it were on a bunch of separate drives.
Okay, so he spent all that time backing up his backups onto other backups when he could have just bought a new server. I don't know why he didn't do that. They ended up doing it anyway. But the old server doesn't work with the Mac? I mean, setting aside the fact that he shouldn't even be using the Mac in the first place. I mean, you have this big brand new PC built by Screenwave. You shouldn't be editing on a Macintosh. But setting that aside, you couldn't have bought like an adapter or something. There's no way at all to make the old server work with the Mac? I mean, I'm now no IT expert, but really? Like, the server just would not work with the Mac? Like, I don't know. I don't know how that... Like, there's nothing you could have done. You had to buy a new server. Just seems weird to me. Now, to be fair about the servers, you know, I guess, you know, the server, the new server that Screenwave bought him, it was probably an updated server that was smaller and could run a lot quieter than the old server. So that's good, right?
So it's been great, but the server is so loud, I had to spend a few days putting up insulation, drywall, and foam to muffle the noise.
Never mind! I guess his new server was even louder than the old server, so much that they had to put up new insulation to block out the noise. This just keeps getting worse, and we're not even a third of the way through the video yet. And just in case you thought I was gonna blow past this little gem, let's take a closer look at this diagram James made for how to back everything up to his new hard drives. To make it easier on us, somebody actually rendered this diagram on Microsoft Paint. And what the hell are we looking at? This guy said, James works harder at pretending to work hard than actually working hard. Several people said it looks like the mad scribblings of a serial killer, but this one's my favorite. This guy says, here's my best attempt to interpret the scheme. First, you copy images, movies, all 500 of them, and family from backup 1 to backup 4. Then you copy AVGN movie from backup 4 to Ethernet. This will take 3 + 7 = 10 days in total. In the meantime, you can't do anything else, because we all know one cannot shoot while his files are being copied. Next, you delete images, movie, and family from backup 1 because it won't mount. You make backup 2 to question backup 1, and backup 3 to take a wild guess about backup 2. At the same time, it's important to copy Proj Lowell to Mac 2021. You replace 1.5 terabytes of movies with 8 terabytes of movies, question mark, because it's very debatable about whether these can be called movies. Step 5, you copy recent projects from Mac 2021 to movies. Don't forget to delete AVGN movie from both the drive and from the memory. Lastly, you split Turbo Rescue to Ethernet in step 4. Overall, it's a very neat scheme. My only suggestion would be to copy Ethernet on separate VHS tapes just for some extra security, and then copy them from the tapes to DVDs and rip on the computer conveniently. Yep, that's the scheme, all right. Thanks to James's handy-dandy schematic for letting us know how he accomplished it. James then spends the next few minutes talking about his camera and microphone setup, and he reveals that he doesn't use tripods because they take up too much floor space, and so instead he makes these insane jerry-rigged contraptions out of wood that look like shit, and he mounts his microphone to the ceiling, which makes it buzz. And even though mounting the microphone to the ceiling makes it buzz, he still feels that it's worth it just so that he doesn't have to use a mic stand. But the best part of the video, this section rather, is where he talks about his lights.
Now let's talk about the lights.
Yes, let's talk about the lights. Let's talk about the fact that James zip-tied a fucking light stand to his ceiling. You really have to hate tripods to think that is a good idea. This guy has figured out every solution possible to make a video without any of his equipment touching the floor. What is the floor, lava? Now, to be fair, this video was made in 2021, and this was while the lockdown was kind of slowly dying. And James, he didn't have a lot of help. He didn't have a lot of crew to help him. So he had to jerry-rig these weird setups in order to make the process efficient enough that he could get the videos out quickly. Because it looks weird, but it is the most efficient and time-convenient way to do this.
Now the only little problem is that I'm locked into this position. Whenever I need a different angle of the room, let's say if the nerd is over at the NES shelf or something, that means everything has to move. The microphone, I have to take this wire down, and then the lights, you can imagine how much of a pain these are. The camera has to go on a tripod, so that means the teleprompter needs to be disassembled. The wire that plugs into the power has to come out, then I usually have to switch to battery, and then, oh shit, I forgot to charge it. Anywhere I want to look, there's so much crap to move out of the way, and that's all very time consuming.
What? So, he jerry-rigs this whole setup to save on time in shooting, but then whenever he wants to do a different kind of shot, he has to take down the whole setup.
Some people have felt the need to point out whenever there's a basic episode that's lacking the multiple camera angles. As if I'm not aware, I'm a guy who makes movies. I like different camera angles.
As if I'm not aware is another line that's been memed a lot on the subreddit. Then there's this... Oh, the part of the video that got a lot of laughs is when he's trying to have himself tied up in a chair with an onion in his mouth, but the onion keeps falling out.
Jesus Christ. Fuck! There goes the onion. Fucking shit! Have to start over. Boy, I wish I had a crew. Wish we didn't have COVID and all this fucking bullshit. God damn it.
And a lot of people bring up that, like, even with the lockdown and everything, not being able to have a crew helping him, like, is there really no way he could figure out to keep this onion in his mouth? Like, can he not bite down on it harder? Can he not, like, have his wife or one of his kids there to help him? Like, does he really need to struggle this much getting the damn onion to stay in his mouth? And then there's this underrated gem about what he says concerning the remote for his camera.
Oh, that reminds me, that's another thing I have to do is find a remote control for the GH5. I heard there's an app or something, so I need to look into that. But every day it's this long list of just things to look into or things to resolve.
Yeah, again, he makes it seem like it's a big deal to just download the app for the camera. Like... if this is a problem that you're dealing with, there's a solution to this problem and you're not looking at it, it just seems lazy. And he makes it seem like, oh, it's just another thing. There's always another thing to look into. And it's like, this dude, it's like 60 seconds of your time. Just download this app. You won't have to worry about this problem anymore.
So when you have a project to do, but you don't have enough time, what do? You get help. While most of the fans watching are really awesome and already get it, there's some people who are trying to be counterproductive to the whole thing by saying they don't like Screenwave or they don't like them being involved in the videos or whatever it is. Do these people not want me to have any help? Do they want me to suffer and do everything myself?
This is where he defends the slobs a bit, and do you want me to suffer? I mean, that was just made to be a meme. People love that quote because it really, I mean, a lot of these quotes, what makes these quotes so great is that there's just this derision to them. There's just this feeling that James is just fed up with all of this criticism. And even though he's a nice guy and he won't show it, he is showing it in what he's not saying. And what he is saying that is slightly out of character for him, for being so snide. Do you want me to suffer, huh? And I don't think anyone has a problem with the slobs being there to help out James with the technical aspects of the show. In fact, I think they like that. They like it when James has a big crew and he's, you know, doing something that resembles more of an actual movie. What they don't like is when the slobs are writing the videos for him, because when you get a new writer, it's not going to be the same. And especially when it comes to his reviews, like with Angry Video Game Nerd, that's more of a comedy show. And so I can understand him not wanting to write every episode of that, even though having Kieran as the lead writer did make the writing suffer. But he also gets help with his Monster Madness videos. He doesn't write all of those either. And in fact, there was a guy named Newt Wallen, who was one of the slobs who never really appeared on camera. And he was put in charge of writing some of these Monster Madness videos But he was so lazy that he ended up plagiarizing a lot of them, and that got James embroiled into this huge scandal where one of the people didn't even know that James wasn't writing these. And then it had to be revealed that he wasn't writing them and he was plagiarizing them. And what sucks about that is that Monster Madness, more so than the Nerd was a character. Monster Madness is supposed to be about James giving his honest thoughts about movies from a perspective that only James could offer. James had this unique sense of humor about him where he would find little details in movies that interested him, and he would point them out in a way that, to me, was just hilarious. And with so little effort, he would point out these details, and just the mere fact of him pointing them out was funny because they're details that other people might skip over.
The Screaming Skull is a super low-budget public domain horror stinker that begins with a cheesy narration warning you that this movie is so scary you could die of fright.
Its producers feel they must assure free burial services to anyone who dies of fright while seeing The Screaming Skull.
If you're gonna die of anything, it's laughter. It's always appearing in strange places, like in the closet, rising from a pond, or floating in thin air. The only thing it doesn't do is scream. Well, sort of. It sounds like a high-pitched door creak. Jenny sure does a lot of screaming, though. They should just call it the Screaming Bitch. Or the nonchalant dickhead who doesn't care about his dead wife.
And these are things, little observations that only James could come up with. That's what made Monster Madness special. And the fact that James wasn't even writing these eventually, you know, it got to the point that James couldn't even find the time to write them, then why are you making them? Like, I understand, you know, he can be a presenter, and people have writers. Like, you can have writers on things, but if it's Monster Madness, it just feels like, what's the point of Monster Madness if it's not James doing it? And a big problem was that he just wasn't upfront about any of this. Like, he was pretending like he was the writer the whole time. And it would be a totally different thing if he had introduced the slobs and been like, hey, these are my new help. They're going to work with me on the videos. They're going to be doing writing, editing. Let me introduce you to them one by one. If he did something like that, then it could be like, okay, at least this is honest. At least he's like portraying the situation accurately, that he's getting help on the videos. But there's been all this secrecy. Like, he's been trying to maintain the fiction that he's the only guy making these. And it's just so weird. I really think that James should just retire the nerd character at this point, and not the way that Doug retired the nostalgia critic. I think it was a mistake to just be like, I'm done with the nostalgia critic. No more nostalgia critic. I mean, he did say that the critic would make occasional appearances here or there. He wouldn't close the door entirely on the character, but he did kind of leave it at, like, you know, he gets absorbed into the plot hole. He's not coming back to do regular videos. And I think that was a mistake, because there's always room for coming back and doing a little bit extra, you know? Like, I had a brief, very short-lived thing that I did called the Rab Roundup, which was supposed to be like at least every 10 weeks I would make a new one of them. But then 10 weeks rolled around and I was eventually like, you know what? I actually really, really don't like this show anymore, so I'm not going to do it. But that doesn't mean I'm closing the door on the show entirely. I'm not being like, this is the end of the Rab Roundup. You'll never see it ever again. I think James should retire the nerd character, but, you know, occasionally, every year or two, make a new nerd episode. There's no harm in that. But while he's not doing it, you know, while he's not passionate about it, he should get interested in something else, you know, take a risk, challenge himself for once. And you know what? Sometimes he does do that. Like, he made that movie, that short film, The Head Returns. Wasn't very good, but hey, it was something new. It was something he was interested in. He also did a couple of other short films that were based on in-jokes from the nerd episodes. The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie trailer, and the, what was it called? Flying Fuckernauts and Astro Bastards movie trailer. I thought both of those were pretty good videos. I really enjoyed those. If you wanted to keep moving in that direction, I think that would be awesome.
Flying Fuckernauts!
versus the Astro Bastards. See it with Monkey Fuck and Thunderfuckers. A triple fuck-tuple feature. My favorite is Monkey Fuck. This city is fucked.
But in recent years, the thing that's been occupying most of his time when he's not spending it making videos or spending time with my kids was the book. He wrote a memoir called A Movie Making Nerd. This was a passion project that he started all the way back in high school, and I don't just mean that he aspired to one day write a memoir when he was in high school. I mean, he started writing the book when he was in high school, and he wrote a huge chunk of the book when he was in college. A memoir about a 40-year-old man where most of it was written by a 20-year-old. What could go wrong? I haven't read the book, but I've heard an awful lot of people talking about it. And from what I can gather, it seems like it's very front-loaded with a lot of stuff about the first half of his life, which makes sense because a lot of it was written in the first half of his life. But it's weird because you'd think that the biggest section of the book would be all about making the nerd videos and getting his career there, and also about making his movie and having a baby at the same time. I mean, that should have been the climax of the book, right? That seems like the obvious place where the most was happening in his life. But no, instead, it seems like most of the book was about him being in film school and getting expelled. Because James did this weird thing where he made this little documentary film about a bunch of troublemakers at film school committing acts of vandalism, and he thought that he was not going to get in trouble for this because he wasn't actually committing any of the acts of vandalism. But it's sort of like a cameraman at a snuff film being like, well, gee willikers, I wasn't committing any of the crime, I was just documenting it. Like, it's probably still not a good idea to document, to be like the cameraman of a snuff film. Like, come on, use your brain. But the problem with this whole thing is that memoirs are different from diaries, because a diary is your thoughts about your life day to day as it's happening. And that's sort of like what this memoir, what a lot of it is, because it's like stuff that he wrote when he was in high school and college about stuff that was happening when he was in high school and college. A memoir is supposed to be with reflection and hindsight and a lot of like knowledge since then that's changed how you feel about things. And I'm not saying that James didn't edit the book with all of that hindsight and knowledge, but it just seems weird that he wouldn't want to just restart the whole thing, because like I can't imagine writing something now and then in 20 years you're writing something about my life now and then in 20 years looking back at it and being like, okay, this is mostly good. I can change a few things here and there, add a few thoughts here and there. But yeah, this is mostly good. This will be the first half of my memoir. I can't imagine doing that. I would want to totally rewrite the whole thing. And so it just makes me wonder, like, how much has James really changed over the last 20 years? He's pioneered a whole industry. He's made a Hollywood movie, and he's had kids. And has that really not changed that much about his life and his perspective? Not enough to make him want to go back and rewrite the whole book? Like, I'm starting to realize that James never really seems to change his mind very much. He seems very stuck in the past, always talking about things like movies he used to watch when he was a kid, games he used to play when he was a kid. Hardly ever, like, does he ever have a movie that he used to like but now doesn't, or he used to hate but now he likes? I just imagine him in 40 years being this old man sitting in a chair with his eyes half closed like, Muppet Babies, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future. Like, even as an old man, he's just gonna be reduced to just like occasionally muttering about something that he used to watch when he was a kid. That's what it feels like James is at this point. It's like, how long is this dude gonna go just like reliving the same nostalgia over and over? It's regurgitative. He just seems kind of set in his ways, and this memoir does kind of demonstrate that, is what I'm saying. But I've been talking a lot about the weird idiosyncrasies of James Rolfe, and you know, how he's this shy, kind of awkward, nerdy guy with very particular interests and doesn't seem to know how to do basic things that would make his life so much easier, and how to manage a work-life balance. He has all these qualities about him, and turns out, if you read the book, there is a very good reason for why he's like this. James Rolfe, if you didn't know, has both autism and ADHD. He was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid. He was never diagnosed with autism ever. He never has claimed to have autism, never brought it up in his book. But to me, it's very clear, and to most people, I think it's very clear that he has autism based on the symptoms that he described experiencing as a kid. Things that he doesn't even remember, but his parents wrote about and told him about. These are symptoms that wouldn't have necessarily been recognized as autism by a lot of professionals in the 1980s when they were diagnosing him. Like Rain Man had just come out a few years earlier, and a lot of people did not know. Like Rain Man was a lot of people's first introduction to autism. So it would have been easy for kids to go undiagnosed back then. And so I think that's what happened with James. He was undiagnosed for autism, but I really think that he had it. And, you know, autism has a thing where the symptoms are usually strongest when you're a little kid, and they level out as you get older. That very clearly has happened with James as well. And that explains why he has to end his workday at 5:40 every day, because he's obsessed with his routine. He needs his routine. I need to end at 5:40. But yeah, in his book, he describes, you know, being unable to make eye contact, having meltdowns, all of these different symptoms that are very clearly autistic. And James was so neurodivergent that he wasn't just held back, he was sent to a completely different school, a special education school. And there's a story from this book that just blew up on the subreddit, where he talks about one of his last days at special ed school. He was 16 when this happened. Remember that. He was 16. I'll let him narrate it. I had good behavior at the special ed school for 7.5 years, but something very unfortunate happened on my last day. My bus driver and the bus assistant both said something cruel to me that came out of nowhere. It started when the day before, I got another ride home and forgot to inform them. They got really mad and scolded me over it. The only quote I remember is, "Nobody tells us anything. We're the bottom of the totem pole. The ball's on the dick." Having an adult speak this way to me upset me. They took advantage of the fact that I was a shy kid who wouldn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to talk to. I felt helpless, bottling up my anger the whole ride to school. When I got there, I reacted in a very impulsive way. I kicked a window on the classroom door, not expecting it to break, but it did. It cracked into a spiderweb pattern. Then I screamed and collapsed, crying. Okay, so the phrase "balls on the dick" became a meme. Of course it did. But, you know, the way people were talking about it on the subreddit, they made it seem like James had an autistic meltdown because he heard the phrase "balls on the dick," which is hilarious. But that's, you know, if you read it, that's clearly not what he was saying. What he was saying was that he did something that he didn't think was a big deal, and then he got his bus driver and bus assistant both expressed a lot of anger and were really mad at him over it, and he just didn't know how to take it because nobody had ever treated him that way before, and he was really sensitive. And I can totally imagine, you know, any kid who's kind of sensitive having problems with that. That would have ruined my day. I don't know if I would have kicked a window and screamed. But like, yeah, I mean, if that happened to me when I was 16, that it definitely would have ruined. It might have even ruined my week. But it's interesting having this context about James, because we can see him as an old man right now, how he's slowing down in his energy. And I think the energy did a lot to cover up his kind of awkwardness and his symptoms of neurodivergence. Obviously, they've gradually went away as he became an adult. But I think in his early 20s, especially when he had people like Bootsy and Kyle there who were helping him get out of his shell. In college, he was getting drunk a lot. Like, there's this video that I like of him introducing Bootsy to a crowd of people.
Spog, I give you.
Don't you fucking ask that.
Are you ready?
Listen!
We're ready. Are you ready for a night of laughs?
I am.
And tiger uppercuts. In the words of Mick Jagger, I say, let's rock this mother to the max. Let's take it to the borderline.
Let's take it to the borderline. I like that.
I give you the B-man, the BC man. Before your fucking time. Before fucking.
Drink it all! Do it, drink it all, baby!
Whip your cock out!
Whip your cock out, Dave! Whip it out! Whip your cock out! Get up there!
Because we have the man,
the master,
who made a documentary about me, which I haven't seen yet. But
sorry, you'll see it. You'll see it.
I give you,
Buddy Holly,
the mother's milking guy. Brilliant, brilliant. I give you,
James, give me a stand back. Stand up.
Somebody get this man a beer.
I give you the John Q. Penis, the porno king, the man who will make you cream your fucking pants. I give you the Brandon, the Kastner, the motherfucking spanking PI.
And he really seems in his element. People are really vibing with him. He does not seem like the awkward wallflower at all. And a lot of that is because he's been drinking. But I do think that he's a guy who, he really does have a charisma about him, and he really does have a lot of potential, socially speaking. But his shyness and sensitivity and neurodivergence as a kid held him back. And it kind of was covered up in his youth, in his young adulthood, by all the energy that he had being a young man. And now that he's getting older, people are starting to notice it a bit more, and people are starting to be like, wow, who is this guy who I used to like? He's a weirdo. There's one final thing I want to talk about concerning James himself, and this is another passage from his book. And it's, let me just say that this one left me speechless. It's really something to behold. I'm not going to give you any context going into it. You just got to experience it the way I did. So brace yourselves. I went over to the ocean, standing alone, staring into the rolling waves. The white noise washed over my brain as all my negative emotions numbed me to the core. Anger toward whoever leaked the tape. Sadness over letting my parents down. Frustration over the dean not giving me a chance to defend myself. Humiliation and embarrassment over telling everybody I was going to be a film student only to get myself kicked out. Fear and uncertainty over the future. Shock over the whole surreality of it all. Disappointment over seeing my social and professional life suddenly yanked away from me just as it was about to begin. Confusion as to how it happened. Guilt for incriminating my friends. And worst of all, the one thing that gave my life meaning and made me feel good about myself was now gone. Life had no purpose anymore. So I thought. I decided I should die. I let my body go limp and collapsed in the water, waiting to drown. For a while, I just laid there. Then, splash! A big wave hit me hard, rolling my body and dragging my face along the muddy sand. I became disoriented, not knowing which way was up or down. I felt salty water rushing into my lungs, and the next thing, I was struggling to find the surface. What was this? I thought I wanted to die, but suddenly, I was motivated by a natural instinct to stay alive. An instinct that didn't care how badly the odds were stacked against me. In that moment, I was given a mental game over screen with two options: continue or quit. I chose continue. I was going to fight this thing. To the bitter end. Coughing up the water, I ran back out, calling for my mom, who was sitting out on the beach. That just might be the worst suicide attempt I have ever heard of. I have to share the Reddit comments. Mommy, I chose to persevere over adversity instead of surrendering the cold embrace of death. That's nice, dear. I'm glad he didn't drown himself. It was wrong back then, and it's wrong now. His mom was just like, what the hell is he doing now? While flopping around melodramatically in the wet sand while letting shallow waves roll over him. She probably looked around embarrassed to see if anybody saw him. My son, she sighed, is such a moron. Wait, is he crying? So, no joke, suicide and suicide attempts are some serious shit. I say this as someone who has considered suicide before, has known people who attempted it, and unfortunately knew someone who in fact did take their own life. And yet, I can't help but feel a sense of, well, cringe just reading this, as terrible as that is to say. Maybe I don't have the full context, but just the way it was written, from the melodramatic and cheesy listing of the emotions to the game over screen analogy, I feel like he isn't treating this with the gravity that a suicide attempt is supposed to arouse, and that's what feels so alien and uncomfortable in an embarrassing way to me. Like, I'm glad he didn't go through with it, and as shitty as this is written, I'm sorry he went through what he was feeling to get to that point, but I can't deny that this is such an awkward way to find out about it. Yeah, anytime people feel like they don't want to live anymore, it's terrible and should be taken seriously. But the way he narrates this story makes it absurdly funny. If I didn't know the context, I would say this is satire, like something out of Clickhole. I know that many people with suicidal ideation make gestures to kill themselves that aren't serious. That is, they do things that they know on some level won't succeed. Their suicide attempt is actually a cry for help, an act that they know, at least unconsciously, will result in them getting the help that they need. But usually this takes the form of something akin to taking an insufficient number of pills, or cutting their skin too shallowly, or jumping from a height that's too low, more extreme, making a noose with a rope that's too long to work. It usually doesn't take the form of someone lying down in shallow water in full view of their parent on family vacation. That's so ridiculous that it's hard to take seriously. And he narrates it not with an awareness of how dumb it was, but in a melodramatic way that makes it sound like he thinks it could have worked. Like, there's a way to tell this story that would almost be charming if he approached it like, my suspension from school threw me into a dark place. It was so bad I contemplated suicide. Lucky for me, I was a moron back then. Wait till you hear about the dumbass suicide method I came up with. But instead, he presents it like the most serious thing in the world. Ironically, that makes it impossible to take seriously. In fact, if he had framed the story as the idiocy of a mentally challenged kid, it would have made it a lot more alarming and would have made James more sympathetic. Jokes aside, anyone who contemplates suicide, no matter how seriously they attempt it, has problems in their life and mental health that they need to address. I'm glad James doesn't want to die anymore, even though reading his take on his own life might occasionally make his readers want to die. That pretty much covers everything I have to say about it. So the book, A Movie Making Nerd, was really the last big piece of meat that the subreddit had to chew on. And ever since then, they've been kind of scrounging, they've been kind of scavenging for little bits that they can pick on. They've been kind of scraping the bottom of the toilet bowl, talking about James's baldness. That's a big deal now. James is going bald, and they gotta make fun of him for it, of course. They're talking about the shirt that he wears as the nerd now, how it's different from the old shirt. It doesn't look as good. His glasses are different, and that takes away a lot of the humor. And I agree with them. Like, there is something like the old nerd look made the nerd funnier, but these complaints are just, they're getting to the point where they're desperate. They're just bored.
Hello?
And since I started this video talking about Doug Walker, maybe I should end the video by talking about Doug Walker. Because the whole Change the Channel controversy and then his review of The Wall were just, it was a 1-2 punch, one right after the other, that just catapulted Doug into this infamy where now the well has been poisoned against him, which I think is unfair, but the well has been poisoned against him so that people can't even look back at his old videos and appreciate them anymore. A lot of people are under the impression that Doug was always talentless and bad or whatever. But James was kind of shielded from criticism for a long time, and it was instead people like Mike and the Slobs who were getting all the attacks. And so it's interesting to compare these two communities, the Change the Channel people and the Cinemassacre truthers, because they're very different from each other. While James remained popular with the Change the Channel people, while Doug's popularity plummeted, on Cinemassacre Truth, it was the opposite, actually. Doug actually has a lot more respect from the people over there than James. And a lot of people over there are saying that Doug actually got the short end of the stick with the whole controversy around him, and that James was the problem the whole time. And the truthers recognize that Doug might not be perfect, but what they respect about Doug is that he actually does seem to have passion still for what he does, and he puts the effort in to make a Nostalgia Critic video every week. And the videos, you know, they're maybe not as great as they used to be, but hey, he's still making them, and he still puts a lot of effort into them, into the production and everything. And when he's on camera, he still has the kind of energy, the kind of, talent for talking that made him popular in the first place. While James is sitting there in his lethargic cocoon, Doug is really, if anything, he's gotten more animated and hyperactive over the years. Like, the bald Doug is a totally new Doug. Like, this memed gif of Doug pointing at the computer screen, this sums up everything about bald Doug. Like, it's a totally new phase in his career, in his life. And I kind of respect it, because at least there's passion in it. At least there's energy. At least he's putting forward a positive vibe. Where James struggles with taking criticism sometimes, and he makes these like snide little comments about it in his behind the scenes video, Doug has learned how to just not do that. He's very good at maintaining a positive attitude toward criticism, like his comments on Oni Plays.
And you've always had a good sense of humor about
It's just like when I really scream loud, I mean, it really does sound like that.
And so you like we see right now, you have a good sense of sense of humor about it, man. You know, you're.
Oh, well, how hypocritical would it be if I'm like, look at this person who doesn't appreciate my art, when I literally make a living mocking people's art? Like, how hypocritical would that be?
He can take a joke, he can dish it, and he can take it, which is respectable to the people at Cinemassacre Truth, because they respect that kind of respect for humor. While James is an awkward introvert, Doug is a highly social extrovert. While James can never seem to find time to do anything he wants, Doug makes time to do whatever he wants. I'm really surprised that I ended up writing a 33-page video about this. For context, my Antichrist Superstar video was 43 pages, and that was 4 hours. But I guess that goes to show you how much I care about James Rolfe. I've taken a lot of inspiration from him, like many people. And, well, maybe it would be good if one of these days he would learn to take inspiration from himself.
Well, anyway, that's it. We just ran out of time because I have to be done at 5:40 right now.